I've been talking a lot over the last couple of days about how ICE is a direct threat to religious liberty in the United States, particularly because ICE is allowed to raid churches. Donald Trump back in January pulled back a Biden policy that prohibited ICE from raiding churches, schools, and hospitals. I have 2 videos over on my YouTube about ICE in hospitals here in Oregon. You should definitely go watch them. And then I've also been talking about ICE showing up when kids are getting dropped off at school and snatching parents. Sometimes they will snatch parents who are taking their children home from school and leave those children alone in the car. Kids are afraid to go to school. They're afraid they will be snatched or their parents will be snatched. It's impacting children's education. We're looking at reduced attendance. The same way we are looking at immigrants afraid to go to the hospital to receive care. And now we are seeing immigrants who are afraid to show up at church during Advent, during this holy time of year, because they fear being snatched by ICE. They cannot go to church and practice their religion. They cannot worship. They cannot participate in their faith community because they are afraid that they will be snatched and stuffed into a detention facility at Christmas time. Now, I talked a couple of days ago about how Kristi Noem and Donald Trump and his cabinet were joking. We're joking about this increased ICE activity at Christmas time. They're like, oh, we're going to give these guys deportation for Christmas. We're going to traumatize children and separate families for the holidays. I mean, the direct quote from Kristi Noem was that DHS is going to send them home for Christmas. The United States is their home. This is their home. But Donald Trump and his little kleptocratic cabinet, they all had a good laugh about that. Shows you the level of brutality, cruelty, depravity from this regime, that it's joke-worthy, it's funny to think about destroying families at Christmas time. So, I'm no longer a person who practices any kind of organized religion, but I still am somebody who believes very, very much in the separation of church and state, in the right of anybody to be able to practice whatever faith they hold dear, so long as that faith is not causing harm to other people. Right? Not going to get on board with a white Christian nationalist nation. I'm not going to get on board with a theocracy in the United States. However bad Mike Johnson and Project 2025 and probably John Roberts from the Supreme Court, however bad they want a white Christian nationalist nation. No, we are a nation founded on religious liberty. What is it the Constitution says? The government shall make no law respecting establishment of religion nor prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Is that how that goes? What ICE is doing is prohibiting people from freely exercising their religion. Earlier this year, the Catholic Church had to make an announcement like, hey, it's okay if you can't get to Mass. It's okay if you can't take communion. It's okay if you can't get to confession. We understand. We understand. You're not going to be in some kind of spiritual jeopardy because you can't get to church because the government is persecuting you. I don't believe enough American Christians are thinking about the way that ICE is preventing people from practicing their faith, the way that ICE is hurting their fellow Christians. But there are a number of churches that are keenly aware and are speaking out, are using whatever means they possibly can to educate people and to raise awareness of what ICE is doing and how it impacts Christians, how it is antithetical, how it is in direct opposition to Christian values, the teachings of Jesus, and the work of the church. I'd like to illustrate 3 cases here. I've talked about them briefly in some shorts I've made over the last couple of days. We all know at Christmas time how important nativity displays are. When we were still practicing, we would actually go to a live nativity and walk the kids through it, and they could see the different scenes. My husband's grandmother used to collect nativity sets and would have a huge display of them at Christmas, and churches often do a life-size one. And many churches are using those this year as a tool to educate people about what ICE is doing. And I want to highlight 3 of those here. 1 is Catholic and 2 are Protestant.
This nativity scene at a Catholic church in Dedham has stirred up conversation across the community, as well as an official rebuke from Boston's Archdiocese. On November 29th, the parish replaced the usual nativity figurines of Jesus, Mary, and Joseph with a large sign saying ICE was here in protest of federal immigration authorities separating families during immigration enforcement in Massachusetts and across the country.
Now, I'm not a Catholic, so I don't know which archdiocese lean more conservative and which lean more progressive, but it's interesting to me that the archdiocese said the people of God have the right to expect that when they come to church, they will encounter genuine opportunities for prayer and Catholic worship, not divisive political messaging. Change my mind on that. I actually do know what the politics of the Archdiocese of Boston are. This was back on December 5th that the Archdiocese said they had to take this down, and the response from the church at that time was, no, we're not going to do that. And this is the statement from Father Jasoma.
Our hope was to similarly evoke dialogue around an issue that is at the heart of contemporary life. That some do not agree with our message does not render our display sacrilegious or is the cause of any scandal to the faithful.
He also said, I think the role of all churches is to speak on issues. That's what the gospel is about. How we treat the least among us is how we ultimately treat Christ. A church outside of Chicago similarly is using their nativity display to raise awareness of what ICE is doing to immigrants. After all, who were Mary and Joseph and baby Jesus sleeping in a stable because there was no room for them in the inn? What does the scripture say about foreigners in your land? I mean, Leviticus 19:33 says, when a foreigner lives with you in your land, do not take advantage of him. Treat the foreigner the same as a native. Love him like one of your own. Remember that you were once foreigners in Egypt. I am the Lord your God. So are not pastors and churches living out their faith, embodying the scriptures when they have nativities like this one?
Everything that you see in that nativity is something that happened in Chicagoland. Baby Jesus has zip ties on. It's because that refers to a real event that happened. When our Mary and our Joseph have gas masks on, that refers to the fact that the folks who have been trying to defend our neighbors and our siblings from being abducted had to wear gas masks because they were getting tear gassed by ICE when they came into our neighborhoods. ICE centurions chasing the Holy Family with their faces covered, I think that speaks for itself. The real intent, right, is to try to update folks and update the story that we're seeing from 2,000 years ago into the present context and ask, what would it be like if Jesus were born right here in Chicagoland? That story is also a story about authoritarianism. That story is also about the Holy Family immediately becoming refugees and having to flee into Egypt because of state-sponsored terror against them from King Herod. The Christmas story is already a critique of power. Herod is not the good guy in the Christmas story. The good guy is Jesus, and Jesus is a baby and ostensibly has no physical power, and yet we know that's not the story that Christianity was telling. So Christianity's always invited us to imagine power anew, power with people, power through compassion, through love.
You were detained recently during an ICE protest in Chicago. Why do you feel it's important for faith leaders to stand up against ICE?
I think it's so important. Faith leaders occupy this really unique place in our landscape because they can tease apart what is the difference between what is legal and what is right.
That's exactly
so
right.
If you go through history and you look, everything that happened in Nazi Germany was legal. Slavery was legal. If you talk to federal authorities, what happened in the Broadview facility and the Broadview ICE processing facility, they'll say it's legal. But we know it's torture. So we know that it's denial of medical care, it's denial of medicine, it's one meal a day, it's filthy conditions, it's inhumane and dehumanizing what goes on in Broadview and what has gone on in Broadview, and we know it's torture. So clergy have this, and religious leaders generally, they have a really important role to play in saying just because the state says something's legal doesn't mean that it's right, and they can really tease that apart in a way I don't think any other institution or group of people can.
Such a good point. I completely agree. After all, Thomas Jefferson said, when tyranny becomes law, rebellion becomes duty. It is our clergy who can help us understand whether the law is unjust and tyrannical, and whether our faith compels us to speak out against what the government is doing. I would like to end here with one more story of a church using their nativity.
Putting the nativity story into the context of right now, especially for Charlotte, right? Because Charlotte has gone through these ICE and Border Patrol raids. The Holy Family is forced to leave Nazareth and go to Bethlehem. And then once they're in Bethlehem, the government uses its military force to use violence to make them flee to Egypt. Trying to show what's been going on, what's been happening. It is meant to shock you. What's been happening to Charlotte families, what's been happening to people all over our city and really all over our state and Chicago and other places is disturbing and is graphic and horrifying. So much of the sanitization of Christmas, or this idea that we're just supposed to allow bad things to happen to good people who are just trying to live their lives, because somebody says that that's the law.
What do you think of churches using nativities in this